请听阿拉山口台记者。
资源飞机出境购物班列实施优先顺序。25号，25站货物量近250万吨，同比增长14%。
台湾的舆论呢也都越来越多，所以此时这一些美国智库呢再放狂言，就像是出大招一样，想以此呢来影响特朗普政府，还是要抱长这台湾牌。他们这些人，所以现在也有美国反战组织就警告，所谓呢要美国在。
Also emphasize inflation risk, reinforcing expectations of the prolonged pause in interest rate cuts. So yeah, actually gold prices are already at 10% this year, extending the gains from last year. So what are the key factors sustaining the gold strength in the current environment, do you think?
Well, we know that the gold supply is relatively constant over time, but the demand could be very variable, right? And that's what we're seeing. And when it comes to the gold demand, it's mostly used for jewelry, for technology, and more importantly, now I think driving the changes are for investment purposes, but also for central banks' reserves. So we're seeing that because of the current situation in the global economy, with Donald Trump's very precarious policies like tariff threats, and also domestic policies like very expensive tax cuts that would increase the federal budget deficit by $4.5 trillion in 10 years. So there is a concern about inflation. So the idea that gold would be relatively stable in its price, as a matter of fact, increasing its price over time, I think that becomes a very desirable vehicle for investors to park their money and invest their money into gold. So I think we're seeing the large demand for gold for investment purposes. But also central banks have been trying to diversify away from the dollars. Again, there are many reasons behind. There's also the economic reasons. You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. So you want to diversify away from the dollar as your reserve currency. But there's also geopolitical reasons, as the United States waged sort of the economic weapons, right, that weaponize the use of the
58.4%，运量超2019年。
Gold. So I think those those are the reasons that we're seeing, rising demand for gold with the relatively constant supply. That's why we're seeing gold prices being rising. Like you mentioned, last year it rose by 27%, which is the biggest rise in 14 years. And it's very likely that this year we're going to continue to see the increase in the gold price.
And 价格, so the US dollar is often seen as the global reserve currency, and gold tends to move inversely to the dollar. So how do you think the dynamics between gold and the dollar will evolve?
Well, when you compare gold and dollar, I mean, gold is definitely something that reserves your purchasing power. I mean, if you look at the past half century that we passed away from the gold standard back in the 1970s, gold has always reserved money for everyone. I mean, gold is much better than most other things like diamond, silver, whatever that is. But dollar is just a paper money. So, especially if you consider the fact that the United States has been printing so much dollar in the past few years, shooting up the monetary reserve, shooting up the inflation. So people, and especially when you look at the U.S. government has been holding a large debt to
我们
几点
几点
见面？
见面？
我们
那现在呢，在谈到核问题的时候，特朗普仍然认为这是美军力量一个必备的要素，仍然希望强化美军战略。
心境下，收费导弹上去，那看看后西方这首词。
United States can be with the global economy and how stable the trade can be. So this is something really worries people. I mean, this worry doesn't happen with the gold. I mean, gold is gold. It's always been there. It's not going to set trade tariffs on you. So that's the reason why people are starting to worry about the dollar. And you see this very large divergence between the gold price and the dollar.
And yeah, so the recent U.S. inflation data came in, of course, hotter than expected. And in the meantime, the Federal Reserve Chairman Powell suggested that the Fed was not in a hurry to cut the interest rate. So how do this message affect the appeal of gold?
Well, I think the inflation and the inflation expectation would definitely push more demand for gold, right? Because idea, again, as we mentioned earlier, that when general inflation rises, people are more willing or more, or they want to park their money in gold because the value will sustain and it will increase. So that would reduce the impact of inflation on their real wealth. So I think that would, in a way, increase the appeal of the dollar. Now, in terms of the Fed's decision not to cut interest rate, I think that would, in some ways, interestingly, have mixed effects in terms of the gold demand. On the one hand, the idea that if the Fed keeps the rate higher for longer, that's going to help to, in some ways, reduce inflation or mitigate that inflationary pressure. And so that would make the gold less appealing because if there's not as much inflation, so you don't have to, buy more gold, so to speak. But at the same time, if the Fed does not cut the interest rate, that means the dollar value is going to stay stronger, right? When it comes to its exchange rates with other currencies, it's going to maintain its value better. So that again would in some ways reduce appeal to go for gold, right? Because the idea is that if you hold the US dollar and it will stay strong instead of depreciating, then it is okay to have more of your reserves in gold or have your more investment in the dollar assets. So I think there are many, interesting, I think, this sort of effects. But again, in general, if that inflation remains elevated or the expectation remains elevated, then that would definitely strengthen the gold value by pushing up the demand for it.
And Li Lun, so as gold prices approach new records, are we seeing the return of a gold rush mentality where people begin to buy simply because others are buying?
Yeah, right. That's a great question. So we have to be able to distinguish between, whether the demand is driven by strong market fundamentals or, driven by secular the consumers. So.
美国总统马克龙
在对葡萄牙进行国事访问期间表示，如果美
推冰是指冰雪逐渐消融时，湖面上冰层泡沫隆起的自然现象。由于温层湖穿进气温回升较快，冰面骤化液动，